You should have left the dog outside." The voice came through the ceiling speaker with the calmness of a man announcing visiting hours, and somehow that made it worse. Staff Sergeant Ethan Cole stood in the center of an operating room that should not have had electricity, should not have had working speakers, and should not have smelled faintly of fresh antiseptic beneath 7 years of dust. The abandoned hospital had been closed since the winter the pipes froze, and the county condemned the entire East Wing. That was what the record said. Yet somewhere beyond the sealed doors, a machine kept breathing in slow, measured intervals. In, out, in, out. Rook stood between Ethan and the darkened doorway, his lean German shepherd frame rigid beneath a coat still wet from the storm. Water slid from the torn edge of his left ear and darkened the pale tile below him. He did not bark. He did not growl. He simply watched the narrow window in the door as if he knew exactly who stood on the other side. Ethan lowered one hand toward him, stopping just above the dog's shoulders. "Easy," he whispered. Rook's ears shifted back for half a second, acknowledging the voice, then returned to the door. The ceiling lights flickered once. Somewhere behind the blue surgical curtain, a person drew a shallow breath. Ethan turned toward the sound. The curtain barely moved, but the outline behind it was unmistakable. A hospital bed, a human shape beneath a white sheet. The speaker clicked again. "Sergeant Cole, this building is unsafe. You need to leave." Ethan's eyes lifted toward the black plastic dome of an old security camera mounted in the corner. A tiny red light glowed beneath it. Someone was watching. Someone knew his name. He reached into his jacket for his phone, though he already knew what the screen would show. No service. The last signal had disappeared 2 floors above, just after the steel doors locked behind him. He looked toward the only exit. The handle did not move. Rook stepped closer to the door and lowered his nose to the gap beneath it. His breathing changed. Shorter now. Focused. The same pattern Ethan had seen years ago in trained dogs searching vehicles at a checkpoint half a world away. This was no stray's nervous curiosity. This was work. Memory. Purpose. "You know this place," Ethan said. Rook glanced back at him, amber eyes bright in the cold fluorescent light. Around the dog's neck hung a cracked black collar with no nameplate, no county tag, and no owner's number. Only a small steel key card, scratched almost clean, rested against his chest. 3 hours earlier, Ethan had thought it was nothing more than a broken piece of plastic. Now it felt like the first answer to a question he had not known to ask. The person behind the curtain made another sound. Not a word, just a faint movement against the mattress, followed by the soft rattle of a metal rail. Ethan stepped forward. Rook turned sharply and pressed his shoulder against Ethan's knee, stopping him. The dog stared toward the ceiling vent above the bed. Ethan followed his gaze. Air moved through the grill, carrying a low mechanical hum and something else. Footsteps. Slow. Directly overhead. "Good boy," Ethan murmured. Rook did not react to the praise. His attention remained fixed on the sound until it passed across the ceiling and faded toward the hallway. Then the room went quiet again. Too quiet. Even the breathing machine stopped. The sudden silence pressed against Ethan's ears. The speaker crackled. "Last warning." Ethan looked at the red camera light. His reflection appeared faintly in the polished steel cabinet beside it. 38 years old, rain-darkened brown hair, gray-green eyes that had spent too many nights pretending not to remember, and a thin scar cutting through his right eyebrow. He had promised himself he was finished walking into places where strangers needed saving. Finished mistaking guilt for duty. Finished believing every closed door was his responsibility. Yet here he stood, locked inside a dead hospital beside a dog that had found him on an empty Pennsylvania road and asked, without words, for help. Rook moved away from the operating room door. He crossed to the blue curtain and stopped at its edge. He looked back once. Ethan understood. Together, they approached the bed. The sheet-covered figure did not move. Ethan reached for the curtain, but before his fingers touched it, the lights went out. Darkness swallowed the room. A lock clicked somewhere behind them. Rook's body brushed against Ethan's leg, warm and steady. In the blackness, a soft voice came from the bed. "Please," it whispered. Ethan held still. The voice was weak, but real. "Don't let them erase my name." Then an emergency lamp above the far wall blinked red, illuminating the room for one brief second. It was enough for Ethan to see that the bed behind the curtain was empty. The red emergency lamp went dark again, leaving Ethan with the impossible image still burning behind his eyes. The bed had been empty. No patient. No sheet. No one who could have whispered from 3 feet away. Rook remained pressed against his leg, every muscle tense, but he did not look toward the bed. He looked beneath it. Ethan lowered himself carefully, one knee touching the cold tile, and reached for the small flashlight clipped inside his jacket. The beam cut a narrow path through the darkness. Dust drifted in the light. Beneath the bed frame, a black cable disappeared through a hole in the floor. Beside it sat a small speaker, no larger than a deck of cards, taped to the underside of the mattress platform. Ethan stared at it. The whisper had not come from a patient. It had been played for them. Rook moved closer and sniffed the device once before turning away, uninterested. He had already known. Ethan followed the cable with the light. It ran beneath the bed, crossed the floor under strips of gray tape, and ended at a metal service panel near the wall. Someone had installed it recently. The tape was clean. The adhesive still shone. Ethan rose slowly. "They wanted us to hear that," he said. Rook looked toward the locked door. The ceiling speaker clicked, but no voice followed. Only a soft breath, deliberate and patient, like someone standing close to a microphone. Ethan felt the old discipline return to him, not as fear, but as order. First, understand the room. Second, find the exit. Third, protect whoever had been unable to protect themselves. He swept the flashlight across the walls. Cabinets. Sink. Rusted instrument cart. A clock frozen at 2:17. Nothing moved. Then the beam caught a narrow line of light near the floor behind the surgical curtain. Ethan pulled the curtain aside. A maintenance hatch, painted the same dull green as the wall, stood slightly open. Rook crossed the room at once. He lowered his head, sniffed the gap, and looked back. Ethan placed his hand against the hatch. Warm air pressed through from the other side. Not outdoor air. Mechanical air. Heated. Filtered. The hospital was not dead. Something beneath it was still breathing. "All right," Ethan whispered. "Show me." Rook nudged the hatch wider with his nose. Beyond it stretched a service corridor barely 4 feet high, lined with pipes and electrical conduits. A row of dim amber bulbs continued into the distance. Ethan removed his rain-soaked jacket, folded it over one arm, and crawled inside behind the dog. The hatch closed softly behind them. For several yards, the only sounds were Ethan's breathing, the faint buzz of electricity, and Rook's paws moving across the concrete. The corridor smelled of damp insulation and bleach. Every 20 feet, a small white arrow had been painted on the wall. All of them pointed deeper into the building. Rook ignored the arrows. At the first junction, he turned left. At the second, he stopped and listened. Ethan heard nothing at first. Then came the distant roll of wheels across tile. A cart, perhaps. Slow. Then stopping. A door opened somewhere beyond the wall. A man's voice spoke too softly to understand. Another voice answered. Ethan could not make out the words, but he recognized the tone. Routine. Calm. The sound of people working where no one was supposed to be. Rook lowered himself to the floor until the voices faded. Ethan studied him in the amber light. The torn ear. The cracked collar. The ribs visible beneath wet fur. This dog had not wandered into the hospital by accident. He had escaped it. The realization settled quietly and heavily. 3 hours earlier, Ethan had been driving west through hard rain, trying to leave Bellwether County before nightfall. He had sold his father's house that morning, signed the final papers at a small office above a hardware store, and packed everything he still owned into the back of his truck. 2 duffel bags. A wooden box of photographs he had not opened in years. A folded United States Marine Corps flag that belonged to a friend whose family could not bear to keep it. That was all. He had no reason to stay. Bellwether held too many rooms filled with silence and too many roads he remembered driving with people who were gone now. The storm had followed him beyond the county line. Rain struck the windshield in silver sheets, and the headlights reached only 40 or 50 feet ahead. Ethan had slowed near an abandoned gas station when a dark shape stepped into the road. At first, he thought it was a deer. Then the shape turned its head, and 2 amber eyes caught the light. A German shepherd stood in the center of the lane, soaked through, one front paw lifted from the pavement. Ethan braked and stopped less than 10 feet away. The dog did not move. Cars did not pass on that road often, especially in weather like that. Ethan lowered the window. "Get out of the road," he called. The dog watched him. Then it walked to the driver's side, placed something on the wet asphalt, and stepped back. Ethan opened the door. Rain struck his face as he crouched beside the object. It was a hospital wristband. White plastic. Black lettering. The printed name had been smeared by water, but the admission date was clear. It was that day's date. Ethan looked up. The dog touched its nose 3 times against the metal identification tags beneath his shirt, as if it recognized what they meant. Then it turned toward the tree line. It walked several yards, stopped, and looked back. Ethan should have returned to his truck. He should have called the sheriff's office and kept driving. Instead, he picked up the wristband and followed. Now, inside the narrow service passage beneath a hospital closed for 7 years, Rook stopped at a steel grate. Beyond it, a bright hallway stretched below them. A man in pale blue medical clothing pushed an empty wheelchair past the opening. Ethan held his breath. The man paused. He turned his head slowly toward the grate, as though he had heard something. Rook became perfectly still. After several seconds, the man continued down the hall and disappeared through a secured door. Ethan looked at the words printed above it. Ward C. Rook pressed his nose against the grate and released one low, broken sound. Not fear. Recognition. Then Ethan saw the fresh scratch marks on the other side of the steel, and beneath them, written in uneven letters on the wall, were 4 words that made the cold corridor feel suddenly smaller. They erase your name first. Ethan kept his eyes on the 4 words until they seemed less like a warning and more like a confession. They erase your name first. The letters were thin and uneven, scratched into painted concrete by someone with little time and no proper tool. Rook pressed his nose against the grate again, then looked toward Ethan. There was urgency in the dog's face, but not panic. He was asking for a decision. Ethan reached for the grate and tested the bolts. 2 were rusted. One was newer than the others. Someone had removed it recently and put it back in place. He drew the small multi-tool from his pocket and worked carefully, turning the screw a fraction at a time while the amber service lights hummed above him. Rook remained still beside him, listening to the hallway below. The bolt loosened. Ethan caught it before it struck the concrete. Then another. The grate tilted inward with a soft metallic breath. Warm air rose from Ward C, carrying the clean smell of alcohol wipes, laundry soap, and something sweetly medicinal. Ethan lowered himself through the opening and dropped the final 3 feet to the tile. Rook followed without hesitation. The hallway was brighter than the abandoned floors above, yet the light felt colder. Pale blue doors stood evenly spaced along both sides. Each had a small observation window covered from within. A digital clock above the nurse's station displayed 12:43 in the morning. Beside it, a whiteboard listed 6 room numbers, but every space where a patient name should have appeared was blank. Ethan moved closer. Under each empty line was a date. Some went back months. One went back nearly 2 years. Rook approached room C4 and sat. His tail did not move. Ethan tried the handle. Locked. Through the narrow glass, he saw only a dim room, a made bed, and a folding chair facing the wall. On the chair rested a United States Marine Corps cap, faded by sun and age. Ethan's breath slowed. He knew the shape of that cap, the way Marines folded the brim, the small habits no civilian would notice. Someone had left it there deliberately. Rook lifted one paw and touched the bottom of the door. Is he in there? Ethan whispered. The dog's ears angled forward. From farther down the corridor came the soft squeak of rubber soles. Ethan guided Rook behind the nurse's station and crouched beneath the counter. A woman in pale blue medical clothing entered from the secured doorway. She carried a clipboard and a paper cup. Her brown hair was tied back, and her face looked tired rather than cruel. She paused at the whiteboard, erased one of the dates, and replaced it with the current day. Then she opened a drawer and removed 6 plastic wristbands. Ethan watched as she placed them in a row. No names, only numbers. Rook's breathing changed beside him. The woman froze. She looked toward the dark corner behind the station. For 1 second, Ethan thought she had heard them. Then she whispered, "Not again." Her voice was barely audible. She set down the clipboard and walked to room C4. Instead of using the keypad, she knocked twice, waited, then knocked once more. A pattern. The door opened a few inches from inside. No one appeared. The woman slipped a small envelope through the gap. "I found someone," she said softly. "A former Marine. He is still alive. I think the dog reached him." Ethan glanced at Rook. The dog stared at the door. The woman continued. You have to hold on until morning. I cannot open the lower gate alone. A man's voice answered from within, weak but steady. Did Rook come back? The dog rose before Ethan could stop him. One quiet sound escaped his throat. The woman spun around. Fear crossed her face, then disbelief. Rook, the German shepherd, stepped from behind the counter. His body remained low, cautious, but his eyes never left room C4. The door opened wider. A hand appeared around the edge, pale and trembling. Rook moved forward, then stopped just short of it. The woman looked from the dog to the shadows behind the counter. Whoever you are, she said, please come out. We do not have much time. Ethan stood slowly, keeping both hands visible. Staff Sergeant Ethan Cole, United States Marine Corps, retired. Her expression shifted, not into relief, but dread. Then he chose you. Who? Ethan asked. The woman looked toward the secured door at the end of the hall. The only dog that ever escaped this place. Before Ethan could answer, the digital clock above the station flickered. 12:44 became 12:45. A low tone sounded through the ceiling. Every door in Ward C locked at once. The woman's face lost its color. They know you are here, she whispered. Then the overhead speakers came alive, and the same calm voice from the operating room filled the corridor. Claire Bennett, step away from the Marine. Rook turned toward the far door. Ethan saw the key card hanging from the dog's collar, and for the first time, he noticed a name engraved faintly beneath the scratches. Owen Pierce. The name on the key card seemed to change the air around them. Owen Pierce. Ethan had known men with that name, men whose records had been folded into boxes and whose voices still returned in dreams, but this was different. Rook was not wearing a tag that belonged to a stranger. He was carrying a promise. Claire moved closer, her eyes fixed on the engraving. Owen trained him, she whispered. Not for patrol, not for explosives, for search and recovery. He could find a man in smoke, in snow, in a building without power. The speaker clicked above them. Claire, this is your final instruction. She ignored it. Her hand trembled near the pocket of her medical shirt, but her voice remained steady. Owen came here 11 days ago looking for a former Marine named Daniel Reese. Daniel disappeared from a shelter in Harrisburg. No family, no permanent address, no one important enough for the county to notice. Ethan glanced toward room C4, and Owen found him. He found all of them. The words landed softly, but they carried the weight of something enormous. Rook stepped toward the door again. The pale hand remained around the edge, waiting. Claire entered a code on the wall panel. Nothing happened. A red light blinked once. They locked my access. Ethan studied the corridor. 6 rooms. 1 secured exit. No visible windows. A fire alarm box beside the nurse's station. An air vent near the floor. The old instincts came back quietly, arranging the room into choices. Who was on the speaker? He asked. Claire hesitated. Dr. Nolan Mercer. He ran St. Mercy before the public closure. On paper, he left Pennsylvania 7 years ago. But he never left. No. Claire looked toward the black security camera above them. He simply moved downstairs. The camera turned with a faint mechanical sound. Rook followed it with his eyes. Ethan noticed the dog's posture shift. Not fear. Calculation. He lowered his voice. What does Mercer want? Control. Silence. People without families are easy to move, easy to rename, easy to declare gone. Claire swallowed. He changes their records, their benefits, their medical histories. By the time anyone asks questions, the person they are looking for no longer exists in the system. Ethan looked at the blank whiteboard. Room numbers without names. Dates without identities. The message on the wall returned to him. They erase your name first. From inside room C4, the weak voice spoke again. Rook. The German shepherd moved closer until his nose touched the narrow opening. The hand lowered and rested against his muzzle. Rook closed his eyes. It was the first time Ethan had seen the dog release even a fraction of the tension he carried. Claire watched them, grief softening her face. That is Owen. Ethan stepped nearer. Through the gap, he could see a man seated on the edge of the bed, thinner than he should have been, gray at the temples, shoulders still held with the discipline of a Marine even beneath a plain hospital shirt. Owen lifted his head. His gaze found Ethan first, then the dog. You followed him, he said. He made sure I did. A faint smile appeared on Owen's face. He has been trying for 11 days. Ethan looked down at Rook. Rain still darkened the fur along his back. His paws were raw from miles of wet pavement and broken ground. 11 days of returning to the road. 11 days of choosing strangers. 11 days of refusing to understand the word abandoned. Why me? Ethan asked. Owen's eyes moved to the metal identification tags beneath Ethan's shirt. He recognizes Marines. Posture. Scent. The way they scan a room before stepping into it. Ethan almost smiled, but the moment passed when heavy footsteps sounded beyond the secured door. Claire turned sharply. They are coming. She pulled a small brass key from inside her shoe and placed it in Ethan's palm. The old hospital still has a manual fire system. There is a control room beyond the laundry corridor. If we trigger the original alarm, the signal may reach the county station. Mercer cut most of the outside lines, but not all. He needed one for inspections. The footsteps drew closer. A keypad beeped on the other side. Rook left Owen's hand and moved to Ethan. The dog stared at the key, then toward the floor vent near the nurse's station. Ethan understood before Claire spoke. That passage leads behind the locked door. Rook lowered himself and nudged the vent cover with his nose. Ethan knelt and loosened the latch. The opening was small, barely wide enough for the shepherd's shoulders. Owen called softly from the room. Rook, find the red box. The dog looked back at him. 1 second. No more. Then he slipped into the darkness beneath the wall. The vent cover settled behind him. Silence returned. The secured door began to open. Claire stepped beside Ethan, and Owen's hand disappeared from the gap as room C locked again. Through the widening doorway came a man in a dark raincoat, perfectly dry, carrying no flashlight. Behind him stood Deputy Caleb Shaw, his badge catching the pale light. Caleb looked directly at Ethan and smiled as though they were meeting at a roadside diner. Sergeant Cole, he said, you have made a very unfortunate mistake. Somewhere inside the wall, Rook's paws stopped moving. For one breathless moment, no one moved. Deputy Caleb Shaw stood beneath the pale hallway light with rain beating along the shoulders of his uniform, though the dark coat of Dr. Nolan Mercer remained perfectly dry. That detail stayed with Ethan. Mercer had not entered from outside. He had been somewhere deeper in the building, somewhere warm, somewhere hidden. His silver hair was neatly combed, his expression composed, and his hands rested loosely at his sides, as if he were greeting visitors after Sunday service. A mistake can still be corrected, Mercer said. His voice matched the one from the ceiling speakers. Calm, patient, almost kind. You came into a condemned building after midnight. You became confused. Miss Bennett attempted to help you leave. That is the version everyone can live with. Claire stepped closer to Ethan. There are people behind these doors. Mercer looked at her with something colder than anger. Disappointment. There are patients receiving care. Without names. Ethan asked. Caleb's smile faded. Mercer studied Ethan for several seconds, taking in the wet boots, the scar above his eyebrow, and the United States Marine Corps identification tags visible at his collar. Names are not always useful, he said. Sometimes they carry debt, shame, memories. Some people come here because disappearing feels easier than returning to the life that broke them. From room C came the faint scrape of a chair against the floor. Mercer did not turn, but Caleb did. That small reaction told Ethan more than either man intended. They were afraid of the people in the rooms being heard. Ethan kept his right hand near his side, the brass key hidden against his palm. Then open the doors, he said. Let them choose. Mercer's expression remained unchanged. Choice is a luxury for people who understand what is best for them. A soft sound traveled through the wall behind the nurse's station. Metal touching metal. Ethan did not look toward it. Neither did Claire. Caleb, however, tilted his head. Where is the dog? He asked. Claire answered too quickly. Gone. Caleb glanced at the open vent. Mercer's eyes followed. For the first time, concern disturbed his calm. Seal the laundry corridor, he said. Caleb reached for the radio at his shoulder. Before he could speak, a sharp electronic tone sounded somewhere beyond the locked doors. Then another. The lights flickered. Mercer looked toward the ceiling. Ethan felt hope rise, quiet and dangerous. Rook had found something. Caleb spoke into his radio, but only static answered. Doctor, the internal line is down. Mercer stepped toward the control panel beside the exit. He cannot access the fire room without a key card. Claire looked at the empty space where the scratched card had hung from Rook's collar. He has one. Mercer turned toward her. The silence between them became heavy. Then the old hospital alarm gave a single broken chime. It was not loud. It sounded tired, as though waking from a 7-year sleep. Red lights above the doors began to pulse. Once, twice. The secured locks clicked, but did not release. That system is disconnected, Caleb said. Not completely, Claire replied. Mercer entered a code into the wall panel. Access denied flashed in red letters. He tried again. The same message appeared. From somewhere inside the walls came the fast rhythm of paws moving over metal. Rook was running now. Mercer faced Caleb. Go to the control room. Caleb hesitated, looking at Ethan. And leave them here. They have nowhere to go. Caleb disappeared through the secured doorway. Mercer remained in the hall, keeping himself between Ethan and the exit. You think the county will come because an old bell rings? He asked. The station is 8 miles away. The road floods in heavy rain. By the time anyone arrives, this will be resolved. Ethan listened beyond the alarm. Beneath its uneven chime, another sound had begun. Knocking. It came from room C2. 3 slow knocks. Then room C5 answered. 2 knocks. Room C1 joined next. Soon every door in Ward C carried a different rhythm. Not loud, not frantic, but deliberate. People reminding one another that they were still there. Mercer looked down the corridor, and his composure finally thinned. Stop that, he called. The knocking continued. Ethan moved 1 step closer to room C4. Mercer raised a hand. Do not. Ethan stopped, not from fear, but because Rook's distant movement had gone silent again. The alarm died. Darkness swallowed Ward C. Only the red emergency lights remained, painting the doors in slow pulses. Claire whispered, something is wrong. Then a green light appeared on the keypad beside room C4. The lock released. The door opened 3 inches. Owen's hand reached through, holding a folded piece of paper. Ethan took it. On the page were 6 names, 6 dates of birth, and 6 United States military service numbers written in careful block letters. Owen's voice came softly from inside. These are the ones still alive. Mercer stared at the paper as if it were more dangerous than any weapon. Ethan folded it once and placed it inside his shirt. They have names now, he said. At the far end of the corridor, the secured exit clicked open. Rook stepped through the narrow gap, the red firebox key hanging from his collar and a bundle of old identification tags held gently between his teeth. Behind him, somewhere above the building, the first distant siren began to rise through the rain. The siren beyond the rain was faint, but it was real. Mercer heard it too. His eyes moved toward the ceiling, and for the first time the calm left his face completely. That signal should not have reached anyone, he said. Claire looked at Rook. Maybe you underestimated what he could reach. The German shepherd crossed the hallway and placed the bundle of identification tags at Ethan's feet. Metal touched tile with a soft, uneven sound. 6 tags. 6 names. 6 lives reduced to objects small enough to fit in a dog's mouth. Ethan crouched and gathered them carefully. 1 belonged to Daniel Reese. Another bore the name Marcus Bell. A third was so worn that he had to tilt it toward the red emergency light to read the letters. Thomas Harlan, United States Army. Mercer stepped forward. Those records are private. Ethan rose. These are not records. He closed his hand around the tags. These are people. The knocking behind the doors continued. It had changed now. No longer separate rhythms. One steady pattern moved from room to room, as if the people inside had found a way to speak together. Rook stood beside Owen's door, listening. The siren outside grew louder, then faded behind the storm, then returned again. Mercer glanced toward the secured exit. The lower bridge is flooded. They will not reach the building. Claire moved toward the nurse's station. The West Service Road stays above the creek. Mercer turned to her. No one knows that road. I do. Ethan saw the thought pass across Mercer's face. Claire had become more dangerous than he expected. Not because she was strong. Because she remembered. Because she had stayed long enough to learn where the truth was hidden. A radio crackled from the open doorway. Caleb's voice came through in broken pieces. Doctor, the control room is empty. The dog opened the outer fire gate. I cannot restore the locks. Mercer lifted the radio from his coat pocket. Return to Ward C. Static answered. Then another voice, distant but clear, entered the channel. Bellwether County Fire and Rescue. Identify your location. No one spoke. Ethan looked at Claire. She understood. The old alarm had not only sent a signal, it had opened a voice line. Claire reached across the counter and pressed the call switch on the wall console. "This is Claire Bennett at St. Mercy Hospital," she said, forcing each word to remain steady. "There are 6 patients being held in the underground ward. We need medical assistance and state police." Mercer crossed toward the console. Ethan stepped between them. He did not raise his hands. He did not threaten. He simply stood there, broad-shouldered and still, the way a Marine stands when leaving is no longer an option. Mercer stopped. The dispatcher's voice came through the speaker. "Claire, confirm the hospital address." She did. "Remain on the line. Units are approaching from the West Service Road." The sound of rain filled the silence that followed. Mercer looked at Ethan as if trying to understand why a stranger would remain for people he had never met. "You have no idea who they are," he said. "No," Ethan answered. "That is why I am staying." Room C4 opened another inch. Owen appeared in the narrow gap, one hand gripping the frame for balance. His face looked tired, but his eyes were clear. Rook moved to him at once. The dog placed his head beneath Owen's hand, holding perfectly still. Owen closed his fingers gently in the damp fur. "He found someone," he whispered. Ethan stepped closer. "He found the road. I just followed." Owen shook his head. "Most people do not." The words were not bitter. That made them harder to hear. Claire returned to the locked room controls and opened the lower panel beneath the keypad. There is a manual release inside, but the power relay is tied to the west wing. Ethan looked toward the open secured doorway. "How far?" "2 corridors and 1 floor up. The stairwell is behind the old laundry room." Rook lifted his head at the word laundry. His ears turned toward the hall. Ethan noticed. "He knows the way." Owen's hand remained on the dog's neck. "Rook has walked every inch of this place." Claire handed Ethan a small flashlight and pointed toward the doorway. "The relay box is red. Pull the center lever down and hold it for 10 seconds. The room doors should release." The dispatcher's voice came again, asking Claire to remain where she was. Outside, the sirens were closer now. Blue light flickered faintly across a high basement window at the end of the corridor. Mercer saw it and stepped backward. He looked toward another door beside the station, one Ethan had not noticed before. A private elevator. Mercer pressed the call button. Nothing happened. Rook turned toward him and gave one low warning sound. Not loud. Not wild. Final. Mercer removed his hand from the button. Ethan placed the 6 identification tags inside his shirt beside Owen's list. Then he looked at Claire. "Keep the line open." He looked at Owen. "Keep everyone talking." Finally, he looked down at Rook. The dog was already facing the laundry corridor. Ethan understood. "Lead me." Rook moved through the doorway, and Ethan followed him into the dark. Behind them, the people in Ward C continued knocking their names back into the world. The laundry corridor narrowed as it climbed beneath the west wing, its walls sweating with old moisture and the stale heat of hidden machinery. Rook moved several feet ahead of Ethan, nose low, ears turning toward every pipe rattle and distant footstep. The beam of Ethan's flashlight passed over abandoned carts, folded sheets sealed in yellow plastic, and faded signs warning employees to keep fire doors. Clear. Nothing here had been touched by weather. The dust was thin. The wheels on the carts were clean. Someone had been using this passage long after the hospital was declared empty. At the first junction, Rook stopped. A green exit sign pointed left toward the stairwell. The dog looked right instead, toward a narrow service door marked medical records. Ethan listened. Behind it came the steady hum of electronic equipment. He checked the handle. Unlocked. Inside, rows of metal filing cabinets filled a windowless room, but the paper labels had been removed. Along the far wall, 6 computer screens glowed in the darkness. Names moved across them in columns beside dates, account numbers, benefit payments, and insurance claims. Ethan stepped closer. Daniel Reese appeared on one screen. Status: deceased. A date followed. It was 8 months earlier. Another line showed monthly deposits continuing after that date, redirected into an account belonging to St. Mercy Transitional Care. Ethan felt the cold settle deeper than the air. These men had not only been hidden. Their lives had been turned into income. On the center desk sat a stack of death certificates awaiting signatures. Owen Pierce was on top. The date of death was tomorrow. Ethan lifted the page carefully. Rook gave a low breath from the doorway. A shadow crossed the hall. Ethan switched off the flashlight and moved behind a cabinet. Deputy Caleb Shaw entered carrying a ring of keys and a handheld radio. Rainwater darkened the bottom of his uniform pants now, and his breathing was uneven. He closed the door behind him and went straight to the computers. "Mercer," he said into the radio, "the county units are on the West Road. We need to clear the records." Static answered before Mercer's voice came through. "Delete the active files and leave through the North Tunnel." Caleb stared at the screens. "What about the patients?" There was a pause. "They will be transferred." Caleb lowered his eyes. Even in the dim blue light, Ethan could see doubt enter the man's face. "Not goodness. Not yet. Just the first crack in certainty." Caleb reached for the keyboard. Rook stepped into the doorway. The deputy froze. The German shepherd did not bark. He stood perfectly still, amber eyes fixed on Caleb's right hand. Ethan came out from behind the cabinet. "Do not touch it." Caleb turned. His hand moved away from the keyboard. "You do not understand what Mercer built here." "I understand enough." Ethan placed Owen's and signed death certificate on the desk. Caleb looked down at the name. He was never supposed to come here. Neither were the others. Mercer said they had nowhere else to go. Then why lock the doors? Caleb did not answer. Sirens carried faintly through the walls, closer now, their rising tones mixing with the hum of the computers. Rook crossed to the desk and placed one paw against the lower drawer. Ethan opened it. Inside were wallets, driver's licenses, military identification cards, and family photographs bound together with rubber bands. One photograph showed Daniel Reese in dress uniform beside an elderly woman holding a birthday cake. On the back, someone had written, "Call your mother on Sundays." Caleb looked away. "Mercer told me no one was searching for them." Ethan held up the photograph. "Someone always remembers." The radio crackled again. Mercer's voice was sharper this time. "Caleb, report." Caleb reached for the radio, but before he could answer, Rook turned toward the hall. Footsteps approached from the stairwell. Slow. Measured. Ethan took the key ring from the desk and placed it in his pocket. "Where is the relay box?" Caleb remained silent. Ethan stepped closer, his voice low. "There are 6 people behind those doors. The county is almost here. Whatever you thought you were protecting is over." The footsteps stopped outside the records room. Caleb looked toward the door, then toward the screens filled with stolen names. His shoulders lowered. "Second floor laundry control," he whispered. "Red cabinet behind the industrial dryers. Mercer changed the lock last month." "Which key?" Caleb pointed to a narrow brass key on the ring. "That one." The door handle began to turn. Rook moved between Ethan and the entrance. Ethan shut down the nearest screen, then pulled the main network cable from the wall so the files could not be erased remotely. The room fell silent except for the rain inside the pipes. The door opened. Dr. Mercer stood in the hallway, no longer calm, his face pale beneath the emergency lights. "Deputy," he said, "step away from them." Caleb looked at Mercer, then at the photograph still resting in Ethan's hand. For several seconds, the only sound was the distant siren climbing the hill. Caleb removed his badge and set it on the desk. "I think I already stepped away from the wrong people," he said. Mercer stared at him. Rook gave one quiet warning breath. Then every light in the records room went out at once. From somewhere above them came the heavy mechanical thud of the West Wing fire doors closing, and Claire's voice broke through Ethan's radio in a whisper. "Ethan," Mercer locked down the second floor. "The relay is still active, but someone is standing beside Owen's door." Claire's whisper vanished beneath a burst of static, but the warning remained. Someone was standing beside Owen's door. Ethan felt the room sharpen around him. Darkness. Locked fire doors. Mercer somewhere nearby. Caleb breathing beside the desk. Rook facing the hallway with his body low and still. "Who else is down there?" Ethan asked. Caleb answered quietly. "Mercer has 2 orderlies on the night rotation. They follow instructions. They do not ask questions." Dr. Mercer's voice came from the hall. "Caleb, open the door." The former deputy did not move. Ethan could hear the change in Mercer's tone now. The patience was gone. What remained was fear dressed as authority. Rook stepped backward once, then looked toward the opposite wall. His ears turned toward the old ventilation shaft near the ceiling. Ethan followed his gaze. A narrow maintenance ladder was fixed beside a row of cabinets. It led to a square access panel above the record shelves. Caleb noticed. "That duct reaches the second floor," he said. "Not the control room, but close." Ethan handed him the flashlight. Stay here. Keep the records safe. Caleb looked at the closed door. Mercer will come through. Then make him waste time. Ethan placed the brass key between his teeth, climbed the ladder, and pushed the access panel upward. Warm air carried the smell of detergent, dust, and overheated wiring. Rook jumped onto the lowest cabinet, then the next, finding his way to the opening without command. Ethan entered first and pulled himself into the narrow shaft. Rook followed, shoulders brushing the metal walls. Behind them, Mercer struck the door with the flat of his hand. You are making this worse. Caleb's voice answered from the darkness below. No, I think I finally stopped helping. Ethan crawled forward. The duct vibrated beneath distant machinery. Every few feet, pale light entered through narrow grilles overlooking rooms below. One showed an abandoned supply closet. Another revealed a laundry room lined with industrial dryers, their round doors black and empty. Beyond them stood a red metal cabinet. The relay. Ethan stopped above the grill. The drop was nearly 9 feet, too far for a safe landing without care. He searched the duct and found a loose support strap bolted into the wall. Rook shifted behind him, impatient. I know, Ethan whispered. We are going. He eased the grill outward. It swung down with a faint creak. Ethan lowered himself through, hanging by both hands before dropping the final few feet onto a rolling laundry cart. The cart moved beneath him, wheels squeaking across the tile. He steadied it before it struck the wall. Rook lowered his front paws through the opening. Ethan reached up, supported the dog's chest, and guided him down. The German shepherd landed softly and turned at once toward the hallway. The red relay cabinet stood 20 feet away. Ethan crossed to it and used the brass key. It did not turn. He tried again. Nothing. Caleb had said Mercer changed the lock. The key fit, but the mechanism had been replaced. Rook pressed his nose to the lower edge of the cabinet, then moved toward one of the dryers. Behind it, a cable ran through a shallow opening in the wall. Ethan followed the line and found a second access plate hidden beneath a folding table. No lock. For screws. He used the multi-tool, working as quickly as the old metal allowed. From the corridor outside came the distant sound of a door opening. Then footsteps. Ethan removed the plate. Inside were 3 levers, marked main power, fire release, and ward control. The ward lever had been secured with a plastic seal. He cut it. The overhead lights flickered blue. The corridor speakers came alive with Claire's voice. Ethan, can you hear me? I am at the relay. Owen's door is still guarded. The others are frightened. Mercer told them the police are not coming. Ethan looked toward a narrow window near the ceiling. Blue light flashed across the glass, then disappeared behind rain. They are already here. He pulled the ward lever down and counted. 1, 2, 3. The building groaned around him. 4, 5. Somewhere below, a lock released. 6, 7. A second lock followed. 8, 9. Rook stared toward the hallway, ears raised. 10. Ethan released the lever. Every industrial dryer began turning at once, empty drums echoing through the room like distant thunder. Red emergency lights came on above the exits. Claire's voice rose through the speakers. The doors are open. Then another voice answered from farther down the corridor. Owen. Rook. The German shepherd moved before Ethan could speak. He crossed the laundry room, pushed through the swinging door, and disappeared into the red-lit hall. Ethan followed. At the stairwell, an orderly stood uncertainly beside the open door, looking toward the approaching blue lights outside. He stepped aside without a word. Ethan ran down the stairs. Not from fear. From the sound rising below. 6 voices. Weak, uneven, but speaking. Each person was saying a name. Their own name. Claire stood at the center of Ward C, holding the dispatcher line open. Doors that had been sealed for months now stood wide. Owen leaned against the frame of room C4. Rook reached him and pressed his body against the man's legs, steadying him. Owen placed both hands on the dog's head and closed his eyes. For one quiet second, the ward seemed to breathe with them. Then Mercer's voice came through the ceiling speakers one final time. You have no proof. Ethan removed the folded list from inside his shirt. Then the 6 identification tags. Claire lifted the active radio. Caleb entered behind them carrying the file backup drive from the records room. Outside, tires rolled through standing water, doors opened, and the first state police officers called into the building. Ethan looked toward the black security camera above Mercer's station. "We have their names," he said. "That is where the proof begins." The first state police officer entered Ward C with one hand raised and the other resting near his radio, his raincoat dripping onto the pale tile. Two paramedics followed, carrying folded blankets and medical bags. Behind them came the steady pulse of blue light through the basement windows, turning the corridor bright, then dark, then bright again. Claire Bennett lifted both hands and identified herself. Ethan Cole did the same. Caleb Shaw placed his badge, his radio, and the file backup drive on the nurse's station before stepping away from them. No one spoke loudly. The people emerging from the rooms looked as though sudden noise might send them back behind the doors. Owen Pierce remained beside room C4, one hand buried in the thick fur at Rook's neck. The German shepherd leaned against his legs, carrying part of his weight without being asked. A paramedic approached slowly. "My name is Rebecca Lawson," she said. "I am here to help you." Owen looked at her identification card before answering. "Owen Michael Pierce, United States Marine Corps veteran. Service number 6419203. His voice was weak, but every word was clear. Rebecca nodded and repeated his name back to him. Something changed in Owen's face. Not relief exactly. Recognition. For 11 days, the hospital had reduced him to a room number. Now a stranger had spoken his name as if it still belonged to him. Along the hallway, the others began doing the same. Daniel Reese, Marcus Bell, Thomas Harlan, Samuel Warren, Peter Dalton. 6 men, 6 names. The officers wrote each one down. Ethan stood near the nurse's station with the folded list and identification tags resting in his palm. He watched the process carefully, afraid that if he looked away, the names might disappear again. A state police lieutenant named Grace Holloway entered from the west stairwell. She was in her early 40s, with rain-darkened hair and a calm voice that carried without force. "Who called the alarm?" she asked. Claire pointed toward Rook. For the first time that night, surprise crossed the lieutenant's face. "The dog. He opened the fire gate," Claire said. "He led Ethan here. He found the relay route. He brought out the identification tags." Grace looked at Rook, then at Owen. "Is he yours?" Owen lowered his gaze to the dog. "I think I belong to him more than he belongs to me." Grace gave a small nod, accepting the answer without question. Another officer approached from the secured elevator. "Lieutenant, we found Dr. Nolan Mercer in the administration corridor. He says this is a private medical facility and everyone here entered voluntarily." Claire closed her eyes for a moment. Ethan expected anger from her, but what appeared was exhaustion. "Ask him why the room doors lock from the outside," she said. "Ask him why the whiteboard has no names. Ask him why the people he calls patients have death certificates prepared before they are dead." Ethan handed Grace Owen's signed certificate. She read the name, then the date. "Tomorrow." Her expression hardened. "Where did you find this?" "The medical records room," Ethan said. "There are more. Computer files, redirected benefits, insurance claims, personal belongings, and military records." Caleb spoke from several feet away. "The backup drive contains everything from the central server. Payment records, patient transfers, Mercer's instructions." The lieutenant looked at him. "And your part?" Caleb did not hide behind the uniform he had removed. "I brought people here. I believed they were being given shelter. Later, I learned the doors stayed locked. I kept telling myself I was protecting men who could not care for themselves." His voice lowered. "I was protecting my own cowardice." No one offered comfort. No one condemned him either. Grace directed an officer to place Caleb under supervision and preserve his statement. Then she called for a full search of the building and requested state medical investigators. The order moved through the radios from person to person. Doors opened above them. Boots crossed old floors. Lights appeared in windows that had been dark for years. The hospital was no longer hiding. Rook lifted his head as a stretcher rolled toward Owen. The dog stepped in front of it. Rebecca stopped. "He can come with us," she said. Owen rested his hand between Rook's ears. "Hear that, partner? Nobody is leaving you behind." Rook moved aside, but he stayed close as Owen settled onto the stretcher. When the wheels began to roll, the dog walked beside them with one shoulder nearly touching the rail. Ethan followed until they reached the stairwell. Owen looked back. "You were leaving town tonight." Ethan stopped. "How did you know?" "Your truck was packed." Rook notices everything. Owen's eyes moved toward the dog. then returned to Ethan. Maybe he did not bring you here only for us. Before Ethan could answer, a woman called from room C2. She was one of the newly arrived investigators, holding a sealed envelope she had found beneath the mattress. Lieutenant, there are photographs in here. Grace opened the envelope carefully. 6 images. Each showed a different veteran arriving at St. Mercy with the same man standing beside them. Deputy Caleb Shaw appeared in 2. Dr. Mercer appeared in all 6. But in the final photograph, taken 11 days earlier, another face stood in the background near the service elevator. Ethan recognized him instantly. The man had been reported missing from his Marine unit 3 years ago, and according to the date printed beneath the image, he had been inside the hospital only 1 week before Owen arrived.